Okay, so hopefully this is going to be one of those talks that either you learn loads of new stuff and it's all super interesting, or it's really reassuring that you're learning about things that you're doing that's very similar to what we're doing. But basically this is a focused talk on what we do at King London Studio, where we're focused on live games, live operations. It builds very nicely on the talk we've just heard. Okay, so this is what I'm going to go through this morning. I'm going to try and move through a fair clip because I really want to get to the stuff at the end about how we kind of do this in a sustainable way. But I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the games that we've got here in London, then how we kind of sort of counteract some of the things that Ken was just talking about, actually, the kind of blend of the data and the science and the art that we put together. And then talk a little bit about how we kind of keep our teams motivated and energized in the long term, which is a real challenge. So I'm going to move through pretty quickly, so I'll try and do questions at the end, if that's okay. Okay, so really quickly, a little bit about me. I've been in the industry for about 16 and a half years now. Unusual background, started in programming, moved into design for a number of years as a lead designer for a good long time. Joined King about 3.5 years ago as the design director for the studio. Moved into production director role late last year as we started to focus on this live game style of work. I sort of used to work in console, AAA type game development, so I've got a big background there, and then sort of the last 3.5 years in casual mobile. So it's probably worth mentioning before I kind of launch into this that King's a company that moves pretty damn fast. Things change all the time. 6 months is an eternity at King, so I'll give you a snapshot of how things are today and just a tiny bit of history here about the amount of stuff that's changed in the time I've been there. King's London Studio is the home of the Farm Heroes franchise. It's where it launched and is still its spiritual home today. In the time I've been with King, since 2016, we've launched 3 new games, sort of full launches. Farm Heroes Super Saga and Champions I'll talk about today, and Shuffle Cats as well. We've developed 7 new game prototypes in all sorts of different genres. We've worked on 12 pitches. We've done all kinds of stuff in the background that never saw the light of day, unfortunately. We used to be 2 studios. We had like a Farm Heroes franchise-focused studio and a new genres-focused studio. We merged them together in 2017, so we're now one kind of hub with one leadership team. Makes things a lot simpler than it used to be. Since last year, the sole focus has been on live games in the market, running live ops, as we've just been hearing. The studio itself is really multicultural, really diverse. Last time I counted, it was about 55% of our game makers are from overseas and don't have a UK passport, so it really makes for a lovely kind of mixture of people, and it's certainly my favourite part of working in the studio too. Okay, so a quick kind of tour of the games we have first, just to give you an overview of what we're working on, and just conveniently for today's talk, the 3 games with 3 different styles of live game development, which fits very nicely for introducing the different kind of work we do at King. So left to right, you've got OG Farm Heroes Saga on the left there. Launched on Facebook originally and moved to mobile. We publicly mentioned that crossed the $1 billion revenue lifetime mark recently, so it's an absolute monster of a game. I'll go into that one in a little bit more depth. But you can see here the kind of the 3 different flavours of game that we're working on here. That's still got a large team working on Farm on the left. Super Saga launched in 2016. It's now got a small team maintaining it. And then Farm Heroes Champions here on the right. We're still kind of rolling that one out gradually. It launched fairly recently, so that gives you a different flavour of live game development, what we're doing to a newly launched game, and one with a kind of a specific mission. Okay, so Farm Heroes Saga itself, as I say, is a big game by any way you choose to measure, really. It's got a large team. It's been around for a very long time. It's made a huge amount of money as well in its lifetime as well. I mean, outside of Candy Crush games, it's basically the next biggest game at King, and it's huge by most people's standards. It's quite unusual in that it's got this kind of +1 style match 3 mechanic, which doesn't have many imitators on the market. So you make a match, you get a +1 added to the cropsies next to it, and collecting those adds more to it. So it's got its own kind of unique style, makes it kind of puzzly to play compared to the slightly more action-focused match 3 games around. It's been on mobile for over 5 years. It's crossed its 5th anniversary now, and we've put over 2,500 levels into this game. And there's a lot of love and craft that goes into keeping that supported. We don't just kind of pump the levels into it and forget about them. We're continually going back through that saga progression, smoothing things through, editing those levels, looking at how users are experiencing it, seeing how different cohorts are working through. So that's a continual, huge chunk of work and something that we take a lot of pride in. We're also then working on new features all the time. That can be anything at the small end of the scale, a tiny tweak to something that exists, or a new skinned version of something that was already in the game, all the way to a completely new feature that we've created ourselves from scratch within the team. And then we're also continually learning from what's going on within King. There's a whole network of studios and games all working together. So we're all talking and communicating and understanding what other people are experimenting with, what's worked in other games, and things that we could perhaps incorporate into Farm. So the team itself is a large team split into multiple feature pods. Hopefully this isn't too kind of shocking, revelatory kind of production methodology here. We also have a team in Barcelona supporting us with some tech work and some of our feature work too. As you may expect, there's basically a huge backlog of features that we work on. And the method for getting those into the game is to effectively have somebody who champions a feature, which we take from like a craft backlog, so maybe some technical feature or something that's a game or design-focused feature. Someone has to champion in that, make the case for that, show the kind of the cost benefit of what it would be, how to maybe get that thing made, having had a few conversations with people on the team. If that's deemed good impact and high impact and something that we want to work on, then it will make its way to the top of the product backlog and then eventually onto the product roadmap, which is what you can see in the bottom right there. So we use a thing called product plan, which we use to kind of give visibility to everybody about what's coming up, so we can show teams within the Farm Heroes setup, what's coming next and who's made what progress, but also for other teams working in sort of CRM or in PR or something like that to know what's coming down the road at what kind of time frame. Challenges of working on a 5-year-old game are numerous, as you might expect. We're continually trying to work out how to innovate whilst keeping the game cohesively together. That's always a real challenge. And the more stuff that you're adding all the time, the more that you've packed in there. You can't show all of that to your players, so how do you space that out evenly? And then we're working actively on things like how to modernize our automation processes, and things like tech debt's always a challenge for us as well. How do you keep modernizing and updating your code base, which is very, very old at this stage, whilst also keep working on features and keep pushing things through. There's no magic bullet there. It's just, we have to just balance those things between them. Okay, on to Super Saga. So this launched in 2016 as a sister title to Farm Heroes Saga. So it was meant to be like a slightly more challenging, more kind of nuanced version of the game. You see the wind mechanic that we added in there. We had operators on the board, which were more challenging sort of puzzles, if you like, to overcome on that board. It's still a big game by most people's imagination. You can have a look on App Annie for the kind of size and scale we're talking about. And we've put over 1,500 levels launched into that game as well. And again, same kind of love and craft goes into balancing this game and continually polishing and refining those levels. The focus for the game has been advertising for recent years. We kind of switched track on this one in 2017, and particularly how to do advertising for King. So how do we integrate advertising into our game in a way that doesn't put our players off and isn't kind of off-putting to them. It's also been a really useful test bed for us within the studio because the code base is reasonably close to Farm. So we've got a little bit more leeway to try some new things out and some new innovations, but then it's close enough technically that we can migrate those into Farm if they're working. So it's a small, lean team for the production here, so very different to the behemoth that is Farm. We're down to under 10 people, let's say. And so it's a very lightweight sprint planning process and a lot of autonomy given to that team to work out how to do things. What's really nice there as well is we're in the process at the moment with this team of working out how to kind of remove the engineers from the equation, if you like. So almost coding themselves out of a job. So we're trying to release stuff just purely with the content release team, and then if they hit a blocker or something that they can't do, then the engineers work out how to automate that or to provide them the tools to do it themselves. So we're on that journey with this game, which is a new challenge for us. And as mentioned before, there's a little bit more space for some technical innovations and some ideas. So a good example from this team was somebody came up with a new way to do some automation testing, which worked really well, which we're now migrating over to Farm Heroes. But that was something that they did off their own back. Okay, so finally to Farm Heroes Champions. I'll be a little bit vaguer on this one because it's reasonably new and fresh. But it launched earlier this year. It's in 3 territories now. This game's experimenting with a new type of social meta. It's got a lovely new switcher in it as well, super shiny. But we're trying out a new type of social meta game. We've pushed the game out, and now we're learning really rapidly how to do that and how to balance it. So the mission with this team was to move really, really quickly to get that game out into the market and then start iterating on top of that. So to get it there, the team chose to do a fairly kind of waterfall style production. They kind of time boxed the pieces of the game they wanted to make, and they executed on it. And as anyone who's kind of familiar with production will know, that comes at a cost. You kind of back end a lot of things that are in the realm of polish and refinement. We're now kind of picking that up now. So what we did was, once the game was actually out there on the market, we took the conscious decision to slow down and split the team up and actually work in a more sustainable way. So the teams are now working sort of 3 flavors of Agile. We've got a team that's focused on kind of quality. And so they're working almost top to bottom, almost kind of triage style on a backlog of quality refinement features. We've got a team now that are enabled to work on the content, so the level balancing and the content that the game needs. They work in a fairly Kanban way, so they're blasting through content and they're refining their process as they go. And then we have some new features coming in, and that works in a more kind of Scrum Sprint Agile way that you're probably familiar with too. And then to round out what we've got going on in the studio, we've got these 3 teams that are shared within the studio. So our business performance team's got data analysts in there, data scientists who are helping crunch the numbers and do the analysis on our games to make recommendations for what we should do next. And that's a shared pool that moves around where they're needed. We have a team called Pathfinders who are like a shared design resource. One of the problems we found on live games is the designers always end up getting sucked into the vortex of what's next, what's the next feature, and they live in a very short-term bubble, and it's quite hard to then get people thinking ahead and designing for the future, as we just heard on the previous talk. So that's our solution to it, is have a shared resource and move them through the studio where they're needed, if they need to get ahead of a problem or add extra capacity to a team. And then we have a small shared technology team. It's not the same as our kind of engine teams. It's more locally to the studio for things like level design tooling and build processes and that sort of thing. Okay, so how do we actually make these games? What's the kind of formula here at King for how we do things? So firstly, I want to kind of talk about the team structure. I think it's a subtle thing that's easy to overlook, but I think actually this is one of the things that helps King tackle some of the problems we were just hearing about the kind of conflicts and the desire sometimes to go straight for the data or rush after a quick fix. So the producers at King own the game. They're ultimately accountable for the game's success and delivery, but they work in tandem with a business performance manager and a designer. And there's a healthy kind of push and pull between each of these roles. So the business performance manager will be looking at how the game's performing, obviously, and then sort of diving into where there might be a problem or maybe an opportunity to improve the game. And they'll make recommendations based off what they're seeing and hearing about our games around King. The designer's then probably more focused on what the customer wants and is thinking more from the customer's point of view and how to build the game in a more holistic way. So rather than, chasing one narrow line of investigation, they've got that ability to kind of zoom out and go, hang on, how does this fit with this thing that we've already done? And then between these groups, they're having conversations all the time to get that balance just right. The producer ultimately makes a call if they can't decide. But you might imagine, for example, that business performance manager might identify a problem. They maybe jump to one solution they think. The designer refines that, and then the producer executes on that. And but there can be a different cascade there between them. But this is really important for how the live games sustain themselves in the long term. Then in terms of where the game teams kind of get their information from, they're kind of surrounded by lots and lots of contextual information. So as you might imagine, we have a huge amount of live data on how our games are performing and what they're doing, both the game that we're actively working on, but other games around King. We have a player insights team, so they do qual testing with players exactly. So if we had a feature's gone into the game and it doesn't seem to be working, we could get some of our players in and understand what's going on with that feature and why it didn't work for them, and get some idea about where maybe we should innovate next. We have a market insights team, so those guys are looking out at the wider market, what's trending, what's happening, what people are trying out there in the market. We obviously got other games then at King as well, trying new things all the time. That's big and small games, so sometimes those innovations bubble up from a smaller game into a bigger game. And then, like I'm sure everybody here, we're also always looking at the rest of the industry, playing games and seeing what other people are trying to get inspiration for what we should be looking at. And then those 2 slides, I don't think either of those pieces would work unless the cultural sort of glue stuck everything together. And I think King gets this really, really well, does this really, really well. So we've got these kind of values are plastered up everywhere, and we interview against them. We take it very, very seriously. The one at the top there, the humble and open one, is crucial because I don't think there's much in the way of like ego at King. You can have an idea, you can challenge assumptions, you can push back against the established norms, and I think that makes it really effective when it comes to suggesting new ideas. The fun and friendly one's really important because everyone's approachable, and I'm not talking just within your local group of people, but I can also reach out to other studios, ask them how they did something, what they're grappling with on a problem, and get their perspective and not be kind of worried about being kind of laughed at or, you know, not taken seriously or pushed away. They listen to you and take it on board and very happy to give you their time. Generally speaking, there's this kind of innovate and validate style of thinking when it comes to a new idea. So rather than it being about who's got the best ability to sales pitch something or who's the loudest voice in the room, we end up in this situation where if it's a smart idea that's credible, how can we form an idea around this, a hypothesis around this, and then test it with some kind of data? So, it could be a small version we put into the game, or it could be something we experiment on locally and see if it's working before we build on that. Finally, I think we do a good job of listening to different types of voices. We're a very inclusive culture. So people who are more analytical in their way of thinking, maybe they take a bit longer to make a point or make an innovation idea. People who may be coming much more with passion, they'll come in with an idea, we'll help them refine it. But I think we do a good job of giving different voices and different styles of communication and space to make innovations. Okay, so this is the bit that I really wanted to start talking about and how we're kind of tackling live game development. I think hopefully everyone coming to this track will be really interested in this area and familiar with it. So you've got a bit of a crash course in how we build, but I think that this bit's going to be the thing that's really going to start to become a huge, huge deal for the industry over the next few years. I think we're already seeing it, to be honest. There's so many big games now in the top 20, whether it's a Candy Crush or a Fortnite or a Clash Royale or whatever. These games are continually now looking at how to almost reinvent themselves continually in the marketplace, adding new things, delighting our customers, coming up with new stuff all the time. And if we're going to do that in a sustainable way, hopefully we're going to continue to see these games succeed in the long term. It's certainly a multi-billion-dollar opportunity if we can get that right. And hopefully what we don't start to see is the kind of horror stories of this being done in the wrong way. I think that most of the kind of challenges stem from the fact that live games are never done or never perfect. You're never going to get the optimal tech solution. You're never going to have that feature just the way you want it to be. There's always going to be compromise in there. And with that comes the temptation then to overdo things, push too far, and so on. There's lots and lots of potential pitfalls for working on live games, and we're not going to have time to go into all of them. But these are the three I was going to focus on. Burnout is a big risk. You really, really can't start pushing the kind of the overtime style accelerator if you want to succeed in the long term. You're going to basically pay a price for that at some point. It will come around and catch you. Morale can be a real challenge. You've got people that potentially are working on the same game, same franchise for a very long time. We're talking, 5-year anniversary plus here for Farm. So how do you keep people motivated and engaged to keep being passionate and coming up with new ideas on that? You can't rely on the kind of product cycle thing if you're going to launch a game and it will die a death or it will be, shipped and you can go around again. You've got to think harder about that and you have to work pretty hard on that. And then career progression as well. You can't measure people's career progression in terms of like number of projects or number of games or how many they've shipped. You've got to think in terms of how do we make people feel like their careers are building and developing alongside these live games. So tackling the first one against burnout and some of the way that we get into that. So we don't have team crunches, and I think it's an important definition there to say, when I say crunch, I'm talking about incentivized overtime working for a production shortfall. So incentivized either from the, holding a stick above someone's head kind of approach or the incentivized through bonus approach. But either way, it's a short-term game that doesn't work in the long term. So we don't do that. The teams set the timelines. They set the times for the features. They set the times for the release. And then we work from there. And then these super dull, super boring screenshots I've got on the screen are a part of how I help the studio budget our time. So the one on the right is a studio calendar that we use to make sure we're not doing too much in any given period of time. We're spacing our activities out through the year. And then we've also got a budget for how we kind of fragment up our time. So we've basically carved out our studio into cycles, so about two sprints of 2 weeks. It makes like a 4-week cycle. And then within that, we work out how much available time we've got to do actual production, how much time we're going to spend on all the other activities that we'll go on to that sustain our team in the long term. So if you squint really hard, you probably see there that actual production time falls into about 15 and a half days, roughly, out of those available 20, and it could easily drop below that once you add contingency, sickness, holiday, all of that stuff, it can be less. And it gets a bit scary when the actual reality of how little production time you've got. But if you don't budget for this stuff, you're going to spend more than you've got, and you're going to start overdoing it. You're pushing your teams too far or overcommitting. We're also, I think, pretty good at flexible working practices. So there's the obvious stuff, if you need to stay home and have a plumber visit your house or something like that, we can accommodate that. But also thinking more around, say, new parents, people with families, we try and make accommodations there. People who have long-term health issues and mental health issues, we're very good at accommodating those to make sure that people can sustain the way that they work in the long term. In terms of morale, I think this one takes a lot of work, and it's not all about kind of money or big parties or anything like that. It's just consistently working on this, little and often, all the time in lots of different ways. I think that there's the opportunities there, sort of working on farm to work on, say, to pour yourself into any of the given features. We've got new things coming up all the time. To show the rancid artwork there of our artists just going to town on a level live op. They certainly didn't need to do that level of artwork, but they chose to because they really wanted to and made it look really great. We try and find a time for at least one game jam a year, which is in the top corner there, the Streaker-based 3D game won this year, as you can sort of see in the middle at the centre there. But we also do every kind of fortnight at least, there's some kind of card game or board game type night going on. We celebrate the stuff that goes on, like level anniversaries you can see down there. The photo in the middle is our VIPs coming in to visit the studio, so we get to actually meet the players that play our games and kind of keep it real and realise who we're making games for and why that matters. And then the company does do a big kind of get together once a year as well, which is this going on the right here. Big kind of conference we call King for Market. We get everybody together in one place. We learn from one another. We have a big party at the end of it too. So there's no one single technique, but it's something that takes a lot of work all the way through the year. And then in terms of career progression, touched on this earlier, it's quite hard to then offer continual product cycles and therefore new opportunities all the time. So we spend a lot of time and effort in this area. So most of the directors in the studio spend a big chunk of their time working on people's career progression and making sure that's moving forward. So the kind of thing that we'll be doing is working out where people want to take their careers or how they want to grow, and then providing them with the sort of training and development that they need alongside what they're working on. We have a big internal training system called Learn at King, which is like online courses, e-learning courses, e-books, that kind of thing, as well as kind of training courses you can sign up for really quickly and easily. And then I think we've got a pretty good track record of promoting from within as well and creating that movement where there is opportunities where we've built people up. So top left there is Rena. She's in charge of that Pathfinders team I was talking about earlier. She's joined us as an art director and moved up to that position fairly recently. Ben was my replacement as design director. He was a senior designer when I joined, and we've kind of gradually coaxed him up into that position, and he's doing an amazing job as a design director. This guy posing next to a unicorn is actually in charge of Farm Hero Saga, believe it or not, as our EP. He's been with us for a while as a senior producer and moved into an EP position last year. And then Sabrina is a good example of kind of internal moves as well. With the size of the network we've got of different studios, there's opportunity to move around. And Sabrina joined us from the Stockholm studio and has done brilliantly and is now in charge of the Farm Heroes Champions team. So that's content-wise, that's everything. I'm just going to wrap up really quickly and then we can talk about, answer any questions you've got. Basically, just wanted to kind of put London studio kind of on the radar. I think we've kind of flown under the radar a little bit as a studio. We've got this massive game that we're looking after and we're busy working away, but we're not here and present at a lot of these conferences, so hi from London studio. Hopefully got a little bit of a glimpse in from how we kind of blend the art and the science side of how we work and a bit of the culture that feeds into that. And finally, you can see maybe some of the challenges we're facing with live games production and how we're pushing back against those. Hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So quickly, just about the game jams. You have so many titles and it's hard to just stop and get everybody on board with a game jam. How do you do it? How do you manage to get more people involved since you have, I imagine, infinite amount of work to do?
Yeah, it's never done. So it's a really good question. The question was on how do we make time for things like the game jams. Similar to what we saw earlier, we budget for it. So up front, We call out how many days we're going to put aside to that. We've got to we normally try and carve out 3 dedicated full days that people can do this and commit to it. So there's no pressure. And the other thing is there's no kind of commercial agenda with a game jam either. It's literally just creative release for people. So there's no, expectation, or maybe this game will launch, or maybe this will be on next. It's just go nuts for several days, and it's focused on that kind of fun and engagement. So what we try and do is, like the other activities in the studio, and basically make sure we've carved out the time for that in advance, so that people don't feel that pressure. And we normally try and time it around, say, a period of time where maybe we've got the holiday releases in the bag, and it's going to be a little bit of downtime maybe at the end of the year. It's a really good time to kind of fit that around the studio. But there's no rocket science to it. It's just planning ahead and making sure we stick to it so that teams can have that fun.
And also it creates a lot of team building, which is important for any studios. So thank you so much, James.